Okay, welcome to the second to last lecture in the section on India, and that's going to be Hindu art. So Hindu art is one of my weak points. So this part is much shorter than it normally would be as far as the other styles that we did earlier in the class. So the Hindu religion replaces Buddhism in India as the main religion, and it's based on the Vedas, which are ancient texts that are stories, they're mythologies. They tell you about the story of a people, but just like any mythology, they tell you about beliefs and cosmology and all of these things that go into culture. So the gods, and this is a polytheistic type of religion. You have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the protector, and Shiva, the destroyer. So you probably might see a few things there. So unlike monotheistic religions where you would see the ideas of creator, protector, destroyer all in one, instead you see different aspects of it. Um, and then you also get the masculine and feminine aspects of Vishnu and Shiva, and then you get but it's the other way around. So Vishnu is the feminine one. And then with the Brahma, you get this kind of like, it's not attached to gender or anything like that. It's just a creative force. So, but the important thing to remember is, although it's polytheistic, all are one through the Brahman. This kind of like spiritual space, the idea of a formless one. So, bhakti means to form a strong personal bond, to share in wisdom. Oops. So the Puranas are mythic stories, and more than the Vedas, which get more into philosophy. We have them instead. The stories are just straight up stories. The tantras are rituals to appease the gods. In the West, the tantra or tantric rituals are usually associated with like sexual rituals, which do exist. But in this case, it just means all rituals to appease the gods, and sex would just be one of them. Moksha is a concept that's like nirvana. It's when you are released from reincarnation and your Atman is one through the Brahman. So that's something that people would kind of look forward to, escaping samsara. So Bhagavad Gita is the song of Lord Krishna. It's from the 2nd century. And the sculpture would be assisting in bhakti, so having this kind of like bond with the Brahman. So Raja is the emotional reaction and satisfaction when looking at art. And that applies to other things that you look at in life. In Hindu religion, even though people think of Maya, the physical world, as being something that's not real, at the same time, the physical world is something to be enjoyed. It's a gift from the gods. So art would be part of that, and other rituals would be part of it as well. So this is the descent of the Ganges, the penance of Arjuna, and it's in Mamallapuram in India. So it's from the 7th century. Hindu art does go back earlier, but you can't necessarily associate it with Hinduism as a religion. So even though Hinduism and Hindi people are more populous in India today, we looked at Buddhist art first because that was one of the traditions that was like specifically associated with it. So like some of the things we were looking at in Buddhism, this is cut out of the living rock, and it takes into account the monsoon season. So India is pretty close to the equator. So in most of India, they have very dry and very wet seasons. So with the pictures I'm showing you are during the dry season, but it was made specifically to have additional meanings during the wet season. So Mamala I commissioned to celebrate the victory of Hinduism over Buddhism. And you can kind of see how this is almost still playing out in modern India. So the Mahabharata The oldest part's about 400 BC. And this is a story where Arjuna does penance in front of the river to convince Shiva to help in battle. So that's what's being illustrated with all of these figures. And again, when the water comes down, it has like an additional meaning. So you can see some pilgrims coming to check out the art, get a little bit of an idea of the scale of it, where they basically try to make the figures and animals a little bit smaller than life scale, but it's surely monumental, as you can see from this picture. So Arjuna is the hero, the Bhagavad Gita. All of creation converges on the waters of the Ganges. So we have elephants and other animals who are all coming, and they're nearly life size, but again, a little bit smaller than life size. And the elephants are very naturalistic. We have a few conventions where the humans aren't quite as naturalistic. But when it comes to the animals, they're trying to portray them as accurately as possible and show this kind of like family creation. So the lions we have are stylized, but the rest of the animals are pretty much like they are. So this is kind of coming from the Buddhist art that we had seen earlier, this particular type of stylization. And again, I love cute lions. So it illustrates the descent of the sacred river goddess Ganga to the earth as it was filtered through Shiva's hair. So we would see during the wet season the water kind of like running down here and having that same effect. So Shiva on the left holds the Pashupati, which is a weapon given to Arjuna. So we see that right here. The Bhagirata is standing on one leg, and I'll show you kind of what that means in Hindu culture. Performed the tapasya in the Ganges back, lived on only air. So there's this, you may have heard about yogis or whatnot that supposedly live on only air. Obviously not a scientific way of looking at things. People can't actually do that. They would die. But it shows this kind of spiritual connection with prana, remember, which is breath, but it has a spiritual meaning as well. So when you get in close, you can see that if you're claiming to live on air, you have to at least look like you're living on air. So we see that with the ribs showing and very, very thin and bony type of figure. So the animals copy poses of the yogin, which is cute, but also it shows this kind of connection between all living things, the oneness of creation. And here we have a temple to Shiva. So it's kind of, this art isn't just showing the story, it's also showing the religion around the story. So let's get a little bit closer to this guy. And these kind of people still exist in India today. They have a very specific hairstyle where they don't comb it. They're sadhu, which means holy man, and they're dedicated to achieving moksha. So they live a spiritual life. Like they don't have other things that they're involved with. They don't have jobs. A spiritual life is what they do. And since ancient times, India has had a space for people like this. It's kind of difficult for them to have a space in modern capitalism, but they still kind of like make a space for it in modern Hindu culture. So they don't comb their hair, so it twists up after a long time, and they don't cut it, so it gets very, very, very long. And you can see one of them are bathing in a sacred river here. So by following Shiva, they're gifted with earthly riches and to be in his presence. So you see these figures that are kind of like soft and fleshy with beautiful clothes and crowns and jewelry and all that sort of thing. The Naga are river spirits, and they're kind of related to other types of nature spirits that we'd seen before. They're symbols of fecundity. So we see the Naga is this feminine and very, very like curvy and voluptuous. And sometimes people in the class would be like, do all Indian feminine people look like that? Like, no, but again, this is a symbol of fecundity. So it's kind of like showing that sort of idea. And then you have these little naturalistic moments. Again, like even though we look at the physical, they look at the physical world as Maya. Instead, we're seeing kind of an embrace of Maya to a certain extent. So these little naturalistic family moments are very important. Obviously, the rock has worn off over time, but yeah. So the Kalasanatha temple, originally commissioned by King Krishna, it's volcanic rock, so it's not an easy thing to cut into. So just the process of being able to do this shows something. It's a pilgrimage site for Buddhists and Jains too. It shows Shiva as the lord of Kailasa, which is a snow-capped mountain in Tibet, an actual mountain, which is right here. And if you know anything about mountaineering, you know that in Tibet, Nepal, India, and China, that in the Himalayas, almost all of the tall mountains have been climbed, and this one is about 21,000 feet. It would be a very difficult climb if people were to climb it, but because of the spiritual significance of it, people ask that it not be climbed. So that's generally been respected by mountaineers. So this one remains unclimbed and has its spiritual significance. So this is cut out of rock, which is kind of like a dark rock, but it was originally whitewashed, so it would have this kind of like shimmering type of effect. And when you walk in it, again, think of the rock cut temples we had before. This can substitute for temples that are made out of wood or other types of materials. It's the same thing, essentially. So when you get in close, you can see there's like massive figures, bigger than life size. We have these fecundity type of figures, very curvy women, very, very like masculine features on the men. And again, it's kind of expressing this idea of fecundity. So during the Chola period, this is Shiva as Lord of the Dance, are some of the arts that Hindus make that you're most likely to see in museums. But these were also used not just for display, they were carried through the temple in ritual processions. So some of the meanings, the iconography that you see, the long hair that's twisted and uncombed, it relates him with the aesthetics. The raised leg, which is part of the dance, is about escaping from ignorance. The world below is represented by this demon, and you can see that Shiva's handling the demon with no problem. The ring of fire represents the heartbeat of the cosmos, samsara, which is reincarnation, and maya, which represents the physical world. And we see the mudra that Shiva uses in this Lord of the Dance type thing. So many different ways. This is one of the most popular subjects and also popular with collectors, so you tend to see it everywhere. The dance destroys the universe and then it's reborn. So this idea of cycles is very important to Hinduism, of creation and destruction. They're seen as, it's not seen as going towards creation and away from destruction. Instead, it's seen like both of them holistically have to go together to be able to have a balanced world. And these, combined with the interest in mathematics, there is a idea of deep time, of very, very long cycles. And with that, it had an influence on mathematics and science around the world, which is a good thing, because then we might not know how old the world is or the universe is. So the hands has a fire which consumes the universe. The drum is an asaka, and that relates him, again, with the ascetics who often carry this type of drum. But it represents the substance of the new universe. So you can see how it's almost making a yin and yang type of visual statement with this. A lot of times with Hindu gods and goddesses, you'll see them with multiple arms. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the visualization of the gods represents what the gods are thought to look like. Instead, oftentimes the gods have to hold more pieces of iconography. So more arms are created to be able to enable them to do that. You can almost think of it as the arms existing in time instead of having multiple arms. So this is Parvati. It's another very popular figure for collectors. And Parvati is the consort of Shiva. And she is shown kind of like what we see with nature goddesses. She's representing fecundity. She has this incredibly voluptuous body, kind of youthful, and has this kind of graceful air to her. We can see that here as well. So she represents fertility, marital union, devotion, but also asceticism and power. So these series of things that could be possibly contradictory are all put inside of Parvati. You can see with these bronze figures that it's highly detailed. It's one of the advantages of bronze. So this is Ganesh. He's the lord of categories, success, and destroyer of obstacles. His head represents the Atman, and you remember the Atman is the spiritual world. And elephants have this kind of like spiritual air about them. And the body represents Maya. So the body is nice and fleshy to show all of the riches that you can have in the physical world. In his right hand, so his right, not our right, he has a goad, and that would be something to kind of like push people along. And in the left hand, a noose to capture difficulties. So kind of like the Buddhists think of certain gods and spirits as being someone that helps you along with your travels and gets things out of your way that are sending you off your trip. So in this one, we have the Brahma. And again, we see these multiple faces, and that's a visualization, not necessarily something that shows you how the gods are considered. So Brahma made goddess of himself, Gayarti, and tries to escape from his gaze. So that's why you have the four heads where you can't escape from his gaze because he's looking at on all sides. The Gayatri mantra is recited by Brahmin young men, but now by everyone. So over time, certain things that were reserved for certain castes, some of those rituals have been released to other people. So this one is Krishna dancing on Kalia and the river Yamuna. Krishna dances and removes the serpent, Kalia, who's pictured here. And serpents don't necessarily have the same types of meaning that they would in Abrahamic cultures, so just be aware of that. And on the bottom, you can see how the serpent, despite being defeated, gives kind of this spiritual gesture of solidarity towards Krishna.